Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the webinar for the Athenry Local Area Plan this evening. So the format of this webinar will take the form of a brief introduction, a short presentation, and then a questions and answers section. You can put your questions in the questions and answers section or facility, which is on this webinar, and we will deal with them at the end of the presentation. The Athenry Local Area Plan went on public display on the is currently on public display, should I say, and will be on public display until the 7th of July, with submissions closing at 4 p.m. on that evening. You can make your submissions online or to email at forwardplanning@galwaycoco.ie, and at the end of the presentation there will be other contact details also available. To date, we have 14 submissions which are up on our portal, with a number that are being prepared to be put up on our portal. And we had a drop-in session last Thursday in the Raheen Woods Hotel, of which we had a very good attendance and excellent participation. I should have said at the very start, my name is Valerie Loughnane and I'm the Senior Planner with Galway County Council. I'm now going to introduce my colleague Brendan Dunn, who's the Senior Executive Planner in Forward Planning, who's going to give a short presentation with respect to the draft local area plan for Athenry, following which, or during which, if people would wish to put their questions and answers into that facility, and then we will deal with that at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to hand you over to Brendan now, and he will start or commence the presentation on the Athenry local area plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Valerie, and welcome everybody to this evening's webinar. As Valerie outlined, my name is Brendan Dunn. I'm Senior Executive Planner in Forward Planning section. So the purpose of today, I will give an overview of the Athenry plan and the draft plan that is currently on display. For anybody that was in attendance last week in the Raheen Woods, it'll be just an overview and a summary of the maps and submissions. So I'll get the presentation here now and I'll share the screen. So yes, so this is a presentation on the draft Athenry local area plan. So we are in the statutory time frame. The Athenry plan has been on public display for a number of weeks. It comes off display next Friday at 4 o'clock. So it's very important for anybody on this call here to make sure that you get a submission in or an observation in before 4 o'clock on Friday evening. Late submissions we cannot accept, and that is within the statutory provision of the Planning and Development Act. So once the submissions are in, we will collate them as part of the Forward Planning team. We'll summarise each submission and we'll give a Chief Executive's response and recommendation. That report will then be furnished to the elected members of the Athenry Oranmore Municipal District, and they will consider the report, and we will have municipal district meetings more than likely towards the middle of September. And the members will either adopt the draft plan or make a number of amendments, which we refer to as material alterations. Those material alterations will go on public display for a period of 4 weeks. So that's just to give an outline. So anybody that puts in a submission, your submission observation will be carefully reviewed and it will be summarized and it will form part of the Chief Executive's report. And that Chief Executive's report will also be made available on our website. This is all as part of the regulations within the Planning and Development Act under Section 20 of the local area plan process. So again, how can the public get involved? We were very happy with the number of attendees in last Thursday's meeting with the drop-in session in the Raheen Woods, and we had a number of calls afterwards seeking clarification. So we are available to contact us for the next week in relation to any queries anybody has in relation to the Athenry local area plan. But again, you can view the hard copy of the local area plan in our offices and in the Athenry area office, and also on our website, which you'll see the link there again at consult.ie. So essentially where Athenry falls within the settlement hierarchy, and it's number 3 there, it's down as it's identified as strategic potential. The description there is large economically active service centre that provides employment for the surrounding areas, and the settlement is Athenry. So the Athenry local area plan follows that, I suppose, classification in terms of the importance of Athenry and where it is identified within the settlement hierarchy. The preparation of the new Athenry plan, I suppose the existing Athenry plan came into effect on the 25th of June 2012. There was a deferral of the notice extending the lifetime of the plan. It expired in 2022. However, we are now reviewing it in line with the new county development plan that was adopted last May. And the publication of the draft LAP again was in Q2 of 2023. The public consultation, the draft plan, this is the public consultation, and we're utilizing social media platforms and our Twitter page, our Facebook page. We have put a news item into the Galway Bay FM, and there was a number of newspaper articles in relation to the Athenry local area plan. So it's very important that we get the message out there that we are preparing the Athenry local area plan. It is the Chief Executive's report will be prepared and presented in 2023 to the elected members. We expect the adoption of the final LAP in Q4 of 2023. So the context of the local area plan, where it fits within the I suppose policy documents. We have the National Planning Framework, which is set by government, by the Department of Planning. We have the Region Spatial Economic Strategy, which is prepared by the NWRA. And then out of that is the Galway County Development Plan, which was adopted last year by the full 39 elected members. And out of that then is the Athenry local area plan. And that is what we're here today to discuss. So again, that's just an overview of the national regional planning policies and guidelines. So in essence, the local area plan for Athenry has to fit within all of these criteria and these policy documents, and it has to fit within the settlement hierarchy of the development plan. The format of the Athenry local area plan is under we've number of sections. We've section 1 is the written statement, which I suppose gives a narrative and gives an overview with policies and objectives. Section 2 is the land use zoning maps, and I'll specifically look at the zoning map for Athenry in a number of slides to come. And we have a significant number of environmental reports, a strategic environmental assessment, AA appropriate assessment report, and we have a strategic flood risk assessment. And a new phenomenon with our local area plans in the last year is a local transport plan. And we've carefully considered the local transport plan in line with the local area plan. The county development plan, as I've alluded to, was adopted in May 22, and it came into effect in June. So in essence, it's over a year now in place, and it was the requirement to prepare and update local area plans. So Athenry, this is the public consultation for Athenry. Again, the population allocation and where we come up with the zoning maps for Athenry comes out of Chapter 2 of the county development plan. So you can see the link there between the county development plan and the local area plan. This is the core strategy from the county development plan that the elected members adopted. And again, Athenry is regarded as strategic potential. We have the CSO figures 2016. We have the core strategy allocation. So in essence, we expect the population allocation for Athenry at 1,350 people. And we expect a delivery on average about 544 residential units. That's at density 25 to the hectare. That we have development management standards that allows a bit of flexibility with the density depending on the site and the site configuration. We have also quantum of green lands, the greenfield lands. So our residential phase 1 lands, we have a quantum of 21.8 hectares. And that is what the core strategy indicates. And that is what the residential phase 1 lands. And I'll show you them on the map in due course. We also have a classification for residential development and delivery of infill and brownfield sites. That's your town centre sites, your underutilized sites, and also infill residential. So essentially, we're looking at your compact town centre where there is vacant land or underutilized buildings. Again, that's the core strategy table from the county development plan. So you can see there where where the equation works out with the population allocation, the hectares that we need, and the density. And I suppose this is in essence then, this is the draft Athenry local area plan and strategic aims. And I won't go through them in detail in terms of there's the synopsis of them in terms of as one of the strategic aims of Athenry is to achieve its potential as a town of strategic potential. We would expect it to deliver compact growth. That's in accordance with the NPF and the RCS and also the county development plan. And we also expect to focus on the town's historic core. And we regard that, and that is covered off in the narrative in the draft Athenry local area plan in terms of the historic role that Athenry plays within the county. We also encourage the promotion of sustainable mobility that is in the aspirations of the local transport plan. And we optimize the potential for Athenry in terms of appropriate economic and tourism development. And I suppose this is a land use plan, it's not an economic plan, but we have policies and objectives that will facilitate development, and we've land zoned in accordance with the core strategy, but also lands zoned for business and technology uses, industrial uses, and business and enterprise uses. So we're very mindful of the location of Athenry, the role it plays within the county, and the expected forecast for development in Athenry. Again, the opportunities and challenges for Athenry: strategic location and role in terms of where it is located in the immediate access to the M6 and the National Rail network. The population growth, we've seen a sustained increase in population, the employment creation, and transportation. Again, the local transport plan accompanies the local area plan. Again, this is a map out of the draft Athenry local area plan in terms of the transport measures and the expected measures in terms of increasing permeability and connectivity from residential areas, employment areas to the town centre. Again, that's covered off in the local transport plan that accompanies this local area plan. Your town centre, your opportunity sites, your town centre is your red area. It's really the core of the town. We have identified a number of opportunity sites that if one of these sites were developed in the morning, it would make a huge difference to Athenry, to the town, and to the historic fabric of the town. The zoning is still town centre underneath it, but again, we have just identified an opportunity sites for these two areas. The opportunity site number 1 is in Cross Street town centre zoning, but we feel that the description there to develop the prime vacant lands for residential use, which would complement the character and surrounding dwellings in proximity to town centre with some retail as well. The opportunity site number 2 is again to provide retail office service uses with a mix of upper floor residential compatible with its town centre location. So they're just 2 sites, for example, that we've identified within the local area plan that would, if they were developed, would make a huge difference to the town. In terms of, I've alluded to the employment already, but the land is zoned in the draft LAP. We've business and technology lands. We have a significant amount of business technology lands in Athenry, but we also have industrial and we have business enterprise. Again, this is the figures from the county development plan, and we have the existing jobs ratio in Athenry. So again, it's all based on the best information we have. We are aware of the census, and the census results are coming out on stream in the next number of days, weeks. So we will be reviewing them all. But at the moment, in terms of the core strategy of the county development plan, we have to follow that guidance. But there will inevitably be a review of all of these down in the next number of months, year, once the full rationale from the census. I know that issue came up during the workshops, or the drop-in session last Thursday in the Raheen Woods. Sorry. Oh, I keep going. Yeah. So the land use zonings then, in terms of the zonings that the map will demonstrate or illustrate, we've introduced residential infill in Athenry, and we've introduced tourism zoning, and the other zonings are carried through from the previous plan. There has been some amendments made to those zonings, but the residential infill is your gap site and may accommodate 1 to 2 residential units, and I suppose it's there to accommodate that type of development. And the tourism zoning for Athenry, where it is located, its historic core, the heritage aspect from Athenry, we felt it was important to identify land for tourism purposes. So we have that is contained in the draft plan. This is I suppose, in essence, for a number of people that came in last Thursday, is what, the specific queries they had in terms of the zonings. The yellow, the residential phase 1 that I would have alluded to, the 21.8 hectares, is the lands identified, and I suppose we strived to achieve a balance of where the residential phase 1 lands were located. I know there's a number of queries and concerns regarding some of those sites based on the drop-in session. So again, we'd invite all of the submissions coming to be sent in to us before next Friday, and we'll review all of the contents of each submission. We've also the industrial lands. We've recognized the importance of the Esker reader, and that is identified on the maps. And we've also, this is your town centre, zoning with your opportunity sites that I've alluded to, and we have business enterprise and the significant amount of business technology lands in Athenry reflects the importance of Athenry and its identification within the county development plan and where it is strategically located along the motorway. And this again is just map 1B. It's the specific land use zoning, the town centre, with the opportunity site. So again, we've reflected the uses on the ground. A number of queries came into us last week about that. Why were certain zonings attributed to certain pieces of land? It's I suppose we have to look at the zonings on the ground. We have to look at the uses on the ground, and then identify the zonings to fit in with that. But again, submissions can come in asking or requesting a change of zoning or amendments to zoning, and the forward planning section will review it, and that will form part of the Chief Executive's report. Again, we have a map to do with the natural and built heritage and specific policy objectives. And we have you can see there the ESCR reader. We've a policy objective, ASP 6, in terms of future development of residential phase 2 lands to be looking at in terms of transport and to be looking at the connectivity. We have a flood risk management plan, and I suppose going on previous experience with other local area plans, this is often one that will come up, that there'll be queries regarding the flood zones A and B. The stage 2 flood risk assessment was carried out by consultants working on our behalf, and we would have ground truthers gone out on site, looked at the lands, looked at the areas for potential development, and in accordance with the flood risk guidelines, the vulnerable land uses can't go on flood zone A and B. So in other words, housing, we can't identify residential phase 1 or phase 2 lands on flood zones A or B. There is some parameter within town centres to look at the constrained land use, but on greenfield lands, we have to identify them and zone them appropriate uses, not residential in nature because of the flood risk. Again, how can the public get involved? Again, visit our consultation page. The webinar today, you can view the local area plan, contact us by phone or email. Our contact details are available. As I've alluded to already, we've answered a number of queries from last Thursday's drop-in session, and we're available to talk or come into the counter to review the plan or ask any specific question. And then ultimately, we would urge people to make submissions, observations, and to send them in before next Friday evening at 4 o'clock. And you will see your submission in a Chief Executive's report. You will see it summarised, and you'll see the recommendation, and that report will be given to the Athenry or more Municipal District members, as I already have confirmed. So essentially, that's a very quick overview of the Athenry local area plan. And I'll hand you back over to Valerie now, and I'll just leave this page up so that people can take down the details of the consultation page. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Brendan, for a comprehensive presentation there. And as Brendan has said, the contact details along with the consultation page are all there on the screen. We can be contacted by phone or email, and you make your submission or observation before 4 p.m. Friday, the 7th of July. And just to, I suppose, reiterate the point that unfortunately under the regulations, we can't accept late submissions. So just to make sure that your submissions are submitted before that 4 p.m. deadline next Friday, the 7th of July. So I suppose from our perspective, the plan that is on public display reflects a number of the concerns people may have had in some previous plans. It also reflects what we're bound for by the population projections and those that were adopted in the county development plan, and then bringing it down into the local area plans, and in this instance into the Athenry local area plan. We have a couple of questions there in the question and answer section, and anybody who would wish to ask a question, we'd ask them to just put it in the Q&A facility there, and we'd be happy to try to answer those. So the first question is there from Councillor Albert Dolan, and the question is the population reflective of the census 2022? And I suppose Brendan has already said that our population allocation was given to us by the department to the NPF, the National Planning Framework. Then subsequently, what happened was it was at a higher range. The NPF had a number of different scenarios. So the population allocation was calculated on the higher range and that was the population allocation that was given to us. The core strategy was then adopted by the members into the county plan, and then obviously the allocation for Athenry then feeds its way down into the LAP. As Brendan has said, we have to wait for more in-depth results from the census, and then obviously that has to be examined by the department in terms of the NPF, in terms of the RSES as well, and then subsequently any amendments that would have to be made will come down to the local authorities. All of the local authorities all over the country obviously would have the same issues as we would here in Galway. So from that perspective, it's based on the higher population projections in the NPF, which was given to us by the department. And any amendments that would be required with respect to demand, it would be dealt with in due course, potentially maybe with the midterm evaluation of the development plan, and all other LAPs will be brought on stream if required. There's another question there, is there adequate provision for housing, given recent announcement by Dexcom with the potential of 1,000 jobs in the coming years? So there is adequate housing over the lifetime of the plan, and like we say, there will be midterm evaluation. If the figures change, then obviously we would deal with that accordingly, and the process would be gone through if that is required. So at the moment, in light of that announcement, which is fantastic for the Athenry area and obviously for the county, we're welcoming it and working very closely with Dexcom with respect to any planning application they may make in the future. Then we would amend if required, and if the census would allow in any further projections required. But at the moment, I think there is adequate lands on R1 lands proposed in the local area plan for Athenry. There's another question there. It's quite lengthy question. So it says, please can you clarify what approach has been, sorry, I just need to move it very slightly over so I can get all of it. Please can you clarify what approach has been followed to identify the residential phase 1 sites selected, as there are a number of quite peripheral sites, 1 kilometre and 1.4 kilometres from the town centre, that have been designated as residential phase 1, while there are other sites available close to the town centre that have been designated as residential phase 2. For example, lands along the R347 that are 800 metres to 1 kilometre from the town centre, and would seem to be better located in terms of the sequential development of Athenry. I can probably hand to Brendan that, but just maybe at the precursor, there are a number of sites there that are residential phase 2, and some of them would have access issues and other kind of servicing issues. So from that perspective, that is one of the reasons, I suppose, why they are not residential phase 1 as well. But I'll hand you over to Brendan for a little bit more in depth to that question, to answer that question.
Thanks, Valerie. Yeah, essentially, I suppose I alluded to as in my introduction in the presentation that the residential phase 1 lands is quantum of 21 hectares, 21.8 hectares, I believe it is. And we looked at the R1 lands, or we looked at all lands in Athenry, and I suppose we looked at the balance of where the residential phase 1 lands were going and where they should be identified based in location, proximity to schools and to the town centre. So I suppose a balance, and that's what we try to achieve and strive. But I know there's a number of queries that came in during the weekend and last Thursday regarding certain residential lands that were identified. But again, we looked at the connectivity, we looked at the footpath, we looked at the accessibility of them. But again, I would urge that people will put in submission observation in relation to them, and we look at them again. But you know, there was a rationale behind it. The basis was the balance of the allocation of lands where they were located, and also to look at where education facilities were also centred. But essentially, that's where we looked. And I know I'll cover off another question that I think Councillor Quinn has come in relation to the residential phase 1 lands north of the railway line. And I suppose that's the same kind of issue or concern that the person has raised here regarding this, the allocation of R1 lands. There's capacity in the wastewater and services, and in the network and in the road infrastructure. There may be slight improvements needed in the road infrastructure, and that's been looked at within the local transport plan. And again, one of the maps I brought up from the local transport plan would show the connectivity and the permeability links that could be created between all of the residential areas with the town centre and with the road network coming in. But again, you know, the balance was looked at. The 21.8 hectares was examined. and the education of schools and facilities were all examined to cover that. So I think that should answer Councillor Quinn's and the specific query there, Valerie.
Thanks very much, Brendan.
Thank you. There's another question here, which will there be any provision for public transport such as bus shelters slash stops? Pardon me. So effectively we have an LAP, local transport plan, LTP, which is also comes along with the actual plan itself. Sorry, I'm just getting a slight bit of feedback here.
Yeah, you're both have mics open, or one of your headsets isn't working or something, I think is
perfect.
what's
No, sorry, apologies. Yeah, sorry, and I was getting a little distracted. So effectively the LTP, which is the local transport plan, identifies the aspects of transport, local transport, and how it ties into the network and so on and so forth. And that is all integrated into the local area plan as well. And that's a separate document. You might have seen from Brendan's presentation that there is a separate document there with respect to that, and it deals with any of the aspects of the transport element and so on and so forth. Out of that local transport plan will fall a traffic management plan at some point, and we're doing that in conjunction with our colleagues in infrastructure and operations. So that would be a separate thing that may fall out of that, but it takes into consideration how it's integrated into the local area plan, and it would consider things like bus stops and so on and so forth. Now, obviously, with respect to the operators, they're outside of the control of the local authorities and so on. But obviously there will be liaison with our infrastructure and transport section with respect to that. So hopefully that answers that particular question. There's another question here. It says, is it possible to download and view a soft copy of the draft LEP for Athenry? Yes, you can download off our website, consult.ie, so you can download it yourself. Or if you want to see a soft copy, you can come in here to the planning office in County Hall in Galway, but there also is a soft copy available in the library in Athenry. So that may be of assistance to that person there in that question. In addition to the above questions, will the advent of Dexcom and the potential for future similar developments, is there any future impact on transport to the Western vis-a-vis business and technology area? Is there a timeline on the further development of the ring road? So effectively, I suppose from our perspective and what's on public display, the local transport plan is taking into account the lands that are zoned. So irrespective of what might go on those lands, so those lands are zoned business and technology and business and enterprise, number of lands zoned different things. So the local transport plan does take on board those particular zonings, and then obviously feeds into that to ensure that we have more sustainable methods of transport and mobility plans, etc., and feeds into active travel, which our colleagues in infrastructure and operations are also involved with. And in the LTP, our active travel team in roads in infrastructure and operations are also involved and are coordinating. We are coordinating with them, and they are assisting us and we are assisting them. So there's a joint up thinking on all of that. And a timeline for the further development of the ring road. I know that a CPO for one elbow, the further elbow of it has been confirmed by An Bord Pleanála. So that piece will probably, I'm not sure of a time frame on it, but it certainly will proceed in the medium term. And then obviously our roads and operations section is also working on further developments of the particular ring road. So hopefully that answers that question. And it is another one there. What is the time frame expected to apply to residential phase 2, and what provision will be provided for vehicular access to those lands, perhaps considering the upgrade of existing roads? And yeah, so I might hand Brendan on that because there's a piece around that as well. That
thanks, Valerie, and thanks for that query there regarding residential phase 2. Essentially, we have a policy objective ASP 5, residential development phasing, and in that the policy objective refers to that if residential phase 1 lands aren't coming on stream for whatever reason, that there's a provision to look at residential phase 2. And in addition, we have a policy objective ASP 6 for access arrangements on residential phase 2 lands at Carharoin, Athenry, and it's identified on map 2. which we look at that as part of the local transport plan and part of the measures coming out of the local transport plan to look at access arrangements in a coordinated manner, because again we acknowledge the fact that there is residential phase 2 lands up there and that they may be coming on stream within the lifetime of the plan or shortly thereafter. So there is provision within the local area plan to accommodate residential phase 2 lands. I hope that will cover that off. And the upgrading of the existing roads the measures are in the local transport plan, and then out of that the local, I suppose, area office with our roads and operations unit will carry out those measures from the local transport plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Brendan. So the next question then asks, why is the triangular area behind houses number 2, 22, 23 and 24 in the Abbey Glen estate been zoned as residential, even though flooding has occurred in this area over the last few years? All surrounding areas behind the Abbey Glen estate, apart from the triangular area, has been zoned as open space in the draft LEP for Athenry. So the zonings would have come out of our flood risk assessment, and that is also part of our consultation documents. There's a number of documents, environmental documents. So there's the strategic environmental assessment, the strategic flood risk assessment, and there's appropriate assessment, and all of those are ancillary and also on our website. So we can have a look at the maps. You can have a look at the maps. If there is concerns with respect to that particular triangle of land, it would have been picked up in our maps, but certainly if somebody has concerns with respect to that, they can make a submission to us, and we'll certainly relook at the maps from the flood risk assessment point of view, and our consultants will have a look at that that particular thing if there is some section, very small section, that needs to be clarified. So if somebody wanted to, the lady that asked that question, if she'd like to make it in a submission, we'd certainly relook at it. And on foot of that question, we will have a look at it in any event, and we will go back to our consultants that are doing our flood risk assessments to look at that. We'll keep that question there as well. That's then. So the next one is, have Irish Water been consulted about R1 zone lands? And the answer to that is they are consulted. We have consulted with them.
Athenry, you're getting that echo again.
Sorry, pardon me. Sorry. They have been consulted about all the lands and so on and so forth. They have given us some information with respect to, so all of those R1 lands, Irish Water have been consulted on those particular ones, and they also are a consultee, so I'm expecting that they will make a submission to the local area plan, as they have done on previous draft local area plans, Ballinasloe, which has gone before it, and Tuam also as well. So they have been consulted, and I would expect them also to make a submission. The next one is, does the plan address the multiple locations where footpaths are inadequate? So I suppose the local transport plan would identify where there would be deficiencies, and that will be looked at through the Act of Travel, or trying to implement the particular local transport plan. Now, again, this isn't a spending plan, as Brendan has said, it's not an economic plan, it's a land use plan, but obviously the local transport plan would pick up on any issues that are connectivity issues that might possibly be resolved, or possibly be able to be resolved. So if the person who asked that question there would like to look at the LTP, if there's particular areas that they feel hasn't been addressed in the LTP, if they'd like to make a submission, again, we'll have a look at that with our consultants on the local transport plan, and also with our operations and infrastructure directorate as well. The next question is, 2 new estates have been built Tuam Road in the past year, yet without real consideration of the quality of residents living in common environments. There are currently no facilities in Athenry that promote community wellbeing and strengthening social cohesion. One playground in the town that is run by the community council, and a small park. Before anything happens, we need facilities, basic services and infrastructure that is equitable, and we need to be located within a reasonable distance from people that they are intended to serve. Will you provide community spaces that can be accessed by all, including people with disabilities and regardless of age? So I suppose from our perspective, again, it is a zoning plan. We try to facilitate as much as possible tracts of land that support community facilities, and there are lands already that are existing community facilities, and also potential community facilities into the future. And we're acutely aware of the fact that there is a population there that needs services from social services, in terms of like community facilities and integration and creating social cohesion and so on and so forth. And there will be sections within the plan that would address that, and would also rely on the county plan from that perspective. And there are a number of different, I suppose, different issues that have arisen during the course of the public consultation. And again, if there's specific issues that either this contributor or anybody else would like to add to that they feel would be beneficial to the town of Athenry, we'd welcome their submission on that particular thing. Yeah, so why is there no zoning outside the proposed ring road? Is the planning reason not to zone outside the ring road? So I might hand that to Brendan there. Thank you.
Thanks, Valerie. Yeah, essentially, I suppose when we were preparing the draft local area plan for Athenry, we looked at the parameters that were there in terms of the relief road. We looked at the quantum of population that was required, and we looked at the employment and the quantum of lands for employment and for all the number of uses. So in terms of consolidating the plan area, that's one of the reasons why, you know, the plan area, I suppose, is inside the relief road, that based on the parameters, based on the RCS, the NPF compact growth from the NPF, we identified lands within the, I suppose, the relief road and that parameter, and that was one of the reasons for compact growth that is espoused in the national planning framework, and that there is sufficient land zoned for residential and for employment uses within the relief road. So that's the rationale, one of the rationales for doing that. Thank you, Valerie.
Okay.
There's another question here, which is, was there any ground truthing on the habitat species present? The environment report appears to be a desktop study only. There's no reference of evidence or a lack of evidence of European Directive Annex 2 mobile species. Some of the residential phase 1 areas contain such species. This will be contrary to the County Heritage and Biodiversity Action Plan and forthcoming nature restoration regulations. So I suppose from that perspective, there is, like I say, a number of reports, and I appreciate this contributor has probably had a look at that. Yeah, it would look at the designated sites. It would look at various different aspects of that. There would be some ground truthing done both from the habitats, and also would have been some ground, there would be ground truthing done on the flood risk assessments as well. All of that would be taken on board by environmental consultants. If there is particular annex that are on lands there, they would be looked at as part of any specific planning application where there would be a requirement for a screening for appropriate assessment, and also a natura impact assessment if the screening requires that. And that's all within the policy objectives that are in the local area plan and governed also by the county plan. So there is an in-depth, but if this contributor has some particular information, if they'd like to submit it as part of a submission, we'll have our environmental consultants also look at that and come back with an answer. And if there are any amendments that are required to be made as a result of that, they will be dealt with in the Chief Executive's report. The next question is, what is the reasoning behind zoning lands R1 that are incapable of being connected to the sewers and excluding previously zoned R2 that are easily connected to the new sewer along the southeast of the plan? So I suppose everything that we have zoned R1 is possible to be connected, is capable to be connected to the source. We have ran it by Irish Water. There's water and wastewater available, and the connections, either with a small upgrade or whatever it might be, they all are. So I'm not quite sure exactly what pieces of land. They're quite specific. But if that contributor would like to give us a call over the next week or so, or even in the next couple of days, if they wish to make a submission and need the information to make that submission, we'd be happy to talk about individual tracts of land if that's what they request to do, and give them the rationale behind those particular tracts of land. The next question is, again, what's the reasoning behind downzoning phase 1 to residential to agriculture? I need to understand the logic behind downzoning some of these sites. Ultimately, if they're unsuitable, they're suitable for R1 development in the last few years. What has changed? Is it purely the constraint of the core strategy figures that has forced decisions on certain sites? Again, I suppose the core strategy figures and the density has had to allow for down zoning. There would be other constraints as well that might have arose during the course of previous plans, where people were trying to develop R1 lands, and there may be connectivity issues, and we've obviously gone back and looked at all of those things. But the constraint of the core strategy would have caused a significant amount of downzoning of the lands, and then obviously other constraints would also have contributed to that. I might hand you over to Brendan if there's anything additional on that particular piece that he may want to add.
Yeah, no, essentially, I suppose when we were looking at the downzoning, I suppose we've increased the density. So you raise the density, I suppose this plan, the previous Athenry plan was back in 2012, and there was a lower density. I think it was about 11 to the hectare, 16 to the hectare. So when you come along and increase the density, because we have to increase the densities in accordance with the guidelines that have been published since 2012, so Athenry, the increase of the density resulted in less R1 lands being available in the immediate future. But again, we have provision in the local area plan to look at phase 2 lands halfway through the development plan. But the rationale was the density, the core strategy, but also the connectivity to the town centre where the sites were located, a balanced approach to the residential phase 1 lands, rather than concentrating all the, from a planning perspective, you have to balance up where the residential phase 1 lands go so that they're not all concentrated in one specific area. And you know, there is services, there's connectivity, there's footpaths, with maybe small minor extensions and upgrades, but in essence the residential phase 1 lands were picked within the core strategy confinements, but also where they were located due to spread the residential phase 1 allocation around. So I hope that would answer your question on that one, Valerie.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brendan. Another question is, why is there a buffer zone around the sewage treatment works in Athenry when no such buffer zone in any other town in the county? I don't know if that's technically correct. There would be buffer zones around all treatment plants for obviously public health reasons. So the buffer zones will be determined based on the size of the plants and so on and so forth. So it's quite a technical reason why buffer zones in different areas have different distances and so on and so forth. So all of the treatment plants that are within the plan boundaries and within lands to be zoned and so on in LAPs would have buffer zones. They obviously vary depending on the size of the treatment plant and the different mechanisms of the treatment plant, because they're all quite different. Irish Water or Uisce Éireann would obviously be they are the providers of water and wastewater, and they run those particular plants. They would have fed into that as well. Hopefully that answers that particular question. We have another question there is, given the ring road is proposed to circle the south of the town, it seems reasonable that we expand zoning areas of the town further to the south to ensure a balanced distribution of housing in Athenry. All the primary schools and 2 of the secondary schools are the south of the railway line. So I suppose we've already kind of looked at this in terms of R1 lands and so on and so forth. There's only a certain amount of land that we can zone R1 in accordance with the core strategy. We've tried to pick them sequentially and ones that are serviced and easily accessible and so on and so forth. So from that perspective into the future, I think it's probably important that when we may need more lands and so on, and maybe that's the direction that Athenry would develop. We obviously would have to look to that in the future. But I'd just also like to add, I suppose, just from that perspective, because it's a very good point in when you're thinking about into the future as well as everything else. In the county development plan, we used to have urban fringe restrictions for urban fringe around some of our towns, one of which was Athenry, and I suppose that no longer exists. The urban fringe doesn't exist as it's been policy objectives no longer in the county development plan. But that does pose the question that you will get one-off development very close to the plan boundaries or just outside it and so on and so forth. And into the future, when you are trying to develop your towns and move them on further, this does create a problem again, because I suppose from the point of view, you don't have tracts of lands that wouldn't be very highly populated. So it is important, I suppose, when we're thinking about our towns in the future and dealing with bigger strategic policy objectives within the county plan, to think about that particular aspect of towns increasing in size in the future and how that can be done sustainably. That's that particular question. There's another one then is, could you clarify why policy objective ASP 6 has been applied to these specific phase 2 lands, but not to other phase 2 lands within the LAP that would also need access and active travel measures? I may just hand that over to Brendan there, and he may get some information on that.
Thanks, Valerie. Yeah, essentially, I suppose ASP 6 relates to a significant tract of R2 lands. So if you look at the zoning map that I had up there a few minutes ago, the R2 lands there up in Carroyne, there's a significant amount of R2 lands, whereas the remaining R2 lands, and I suppose it answers maybe some of the questions I've raised about the R1 lands and why we zoned where we did zone. The R2 lands then in the remaining parts of the LAP boundary can be accessed via the traffic or the road network or through a natural progression of the R1 lands. So we felt it was very important to insert a policy objective to look at those specific lands in its first instance. That is not to say that if there's small pockets of remaining R2 lands that aren't accessible, that they won't be looked at. They will be looked at in terms of our local transport plan and the measures coming out of that. But it's just that if you look at the map, you'll see that quantum of R2 lands up there is significant, whereas the remaining R2 lands aren't as significant in terms of quantum, but also where their location is a natural progression of the residential phase 1 lands or location along the road network. So I hope that answers that question.
Thanks, Brendan. There's another question there is, why is there specific focus on eskers as only one form of a natural event? As only one form of a natural event. They are frequently quarried elsewhere. Is it not clear why the zoning on eskers has been highlighted? Does it affect all planning adjacent to the eskers in the area? So effectively as part of the Esker Riada, which is a protected eskers, and eskers again are protected for various different reasons, either for heritage reasons or also protected under archaeology and all of the different things. We have identified them. Some of them have been degraded already, and I suppose the ones that are remaining that are there, we've identified them specifically. They are zoned within agricultural, and there is policy objectives with respect to development in agricultural, albeit limited, and any development that would come in would effectively have to just take into consideration how degraded those particular ones are and whether or not there are elements of it that could be protected, or are maybe elements of it that are already degraded and that it wouldn't affect any development in that particular area. So I suppose as we're going along, all local authorities are trying to improve the physical environment, making sure that we protect as much as possible of those things that are unique to the area of any local area plan and so on and so forth. And that's why in this particular LAP that we've identified those, because as you will probably see, they are sporadic in a way where they were it was one long esker at one point, but they've obviously been degraded, and it's important, I suppose, to highlight them, protect them where possible, and then obviously have them looked at if there's development in that particular area and assessed accordingly. So I hope that answers that particular question. I think that's all the questions that are currently in the questions and answers at the moment. But if there's anybody who'd like to add another question, there's another question here. It's the residential phase 1 area to the east of Tuam Line is an Esker 2. Well, again, we would have looked at all of those particular things, and again, depending on what status they held and how much of it they were degraded, and obviously we would have looked at that. But certainly if there's something in that particular phase 1 or residential phase 1 lands that you have concerns about or required to be protected, if you'd like to put it in as a submission, we'll certainly have it re-looked at. Both ourselves here in the forward planning section will have a look at it, and we'll also get to our environmental consultants, but also not alone that, but also our heritage officer here and our biodiversity officer to have a look at those particular aspects. If there's one particular area that you feel should either be additionally protected, or if there's some particular area that you feel is degraded or whatever, and that shouldn't be as protected. So we'd be happy to look at those, and that's what the public consultation is all about, to get people's views, and also to make sure that if there is local knowledge out there as well, that we integrate that as much as possible, because the LAPs are actually for again for the people of the town and so on, and to develop their town into the future. So all comments, all suggestions, any queries and so on, we're happy to take on board of those, try to answer those queries. And if during the course of the submissions, when we examine all of them, prepare the Chief Executive's reports, and if there's amendments to be made, we will be proposing those amendments as well in the Chief Executive's report to the members, who will then consider the Chief Executive's report and make their deliberations on them. So Councillor Quinn has just put a question that said, please make submissions, and that's what we're all here for. So hopefully, yeah, as many submissions as people feel they wish to make, this is the opportunity to do that. and this is the forum on which to do it. I suppose Brendan has already said that the process after this is once the submissions are closed on the 7th, we will prepare a chief executive's report, which is taking each one of those submissions, doing a synopsis of them, inserting it into the chief executive's report, making a chief executive's response, and then a chief executive's recommendation. So we must do that within 6 weeks of the closing date and deliver that report to the members, who then just have they have some time to consider it, and then when the members consider it, we will hold a meeting with the members and go through the chief executive's report and the deliberations on that chief executive report. If there is amendments made out of that, any changes as a result of submissions made by the public, or any changes that the members wish to make as well, those material alterations will go back on public display for a period of 4 weeks. And the same process happens again. Any submissions made on those will then be put into a chief executive report, delivered to the members, and the members will deliberate on it again through a meeting, and then the plan will be eventually adopted based on the original draft, any material alterations that were on public display. Just to be clear that any submissions in the next round after this main public consultation piece will just be on the material alterations, if any are made, either by the chief executive's recommendations or also by our elected members or your elected members there that represent you there. So just to clarify that particular point. And so it's very important that everybody who has queries or anything that they have suggestions and so on, that they make the submissions to us, and they'll all be carefully considered. And if there is a need for us to go to, as I said previously, to environmental consultants to check out particular elements with respect to flooding, I know there's a question there, also with respect to the ESCRs or anything else, we certainly will do that. I know there were some specific questions that were a little difficult to answer because they were about specific tracts of land. If anybody wants clarity on those, we do have the information there to contact us, and we'd be happy to try to give the information. And then if you wish to make a submission based on any information that you do get, or anything that you wish to do, that we'd be happy to receive those submissions before next Friday, the 7th of July. So I think that's all the questions that we currently have. Thank you. Everybody is saying thank you. Thank you very much for attending as well. We greatly appreciate the engagement from everybody. Just double check, there might be any questions here. Nope, I think we have all of the questions. Yep, I think we have all of those questions there. Great. So I think if we have no further questions, I'd just like to thank everybody for joining the webinar. Hopefully it's been useful and informative. And like I say, we've reiterated, I suppose a number of the contributors have also reiterated to make the submissions to us, and they will be carefully considered. So like I say, thank you very much for your time. We greatly appreciate it. This will be recorded and we'll place it on our website in a number of days' time, so that it can be played back if anybody had missed the opportunity, and they can play it back, listen to the answers to some of the questions. And if anybody has any further questions, please do not hesitate to contact us, and we'll do our very best to answer those questions, and hopefully it will aid in any submissions or clarities that are required. So I'd just like to thank my colleagues here, thank Brendan Dunn, and also our other colleague here, Anne Power, for setting up all of the webinar and so on and so forth, and all of the work done within the planning unit, not just for planning, but within the entire unit, that helps us do our jobs as efficiently as we possibly can. So I'd just like to thank everybody for that. And also our Director of Services, Michael Owens, who I know is on our call here as well this evening. Thanks very much.